Israel has passed a law that says only Jews have the right to self-determination, and Israel has declared all of Al-Quds as Israel's capital and has legalized segregated Jewish-only communities. For some Israeli lawmakers and Jewish groups, this is a step too far, with them raising human rights concerns. Palestinians in Israel are understandably furious, saying this will further diminish their standing. Is this a confirmation of what Chomsky has called an apartheid system? Join me, Waqar Azzuz, to discuss the fallout from Israel's nation-state law. Well, our guests for tonight's discussion are author and former U.S. diplomat Michael Springman, who is joining us live from Washington, D.C. We're also joined by author and political commentator Jeffrey Alderman, who is joining us live from London. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Jeffrey, I'll start with you, if I may. What are your thoughts on Israel's Jewish nation-state law? Pardon me.
Well, I have a translation into English of the law in front of me, and most of it is just declaratory. It simply says what the state of affairs already is. I was particularly pleased to see that although Clause 4 says Hebrew is the language of the state, it then goes on to say this clause does not change the status given to the Arabic language before this particular law was created, so the status of the Arabic language is fully secure. And so far as religious observance is concerned, it says Saturday and the Jewish holidays are the official days of rest in the state, but, and I'm quoting, those who are not Jewish have the right to honour their days of rest and their holidays, which is absolutely right.
Michael, what do you make of that? Obviously, none of us, I imagine, speak Hebrew, Michael, but obviously there are concerns, Michael, even on the part of Western Jewish organizations, such as the American Jewish Committee, which has said it is, quote-unquote, deeply disappointed with this law, and I'm quoting it now, that puts at risk the commitment of Israel's founders to build a country that is both Jewish and democratic, end quote. What do you make of that, Michael?
Well, the whole thing boils down to what Rabbi David Weiss of New York City said at the Al-Quds conference in Mashhad, Iran in May. He said that Judaism is a religion. It is not, repeat, not a nationality. And the series of articles in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz bitterly denounced this, saying that it has taken the emperor's clothes off the Israeli government, the Zionist entity, and shown it for what it is, an apartheid entity, a racist entity, a discriminatory entity. And there were thousands marching in Tel Aviv against the law. Even the president of Israel, Rivlin, he opposed it, as did the Israeli Attorney General. There are 14 American organizations that have come out against the law. And basically, the law simply shows Israel for what it is, a state that discriminates against Palestinians, a state that accords them second-class, highly inferior status because of their nationality and their religion. And they have taken the land from the Palestinians. Now they're taking their rights from them. So I don't think you can put it in any kind of good light at all. I think that what rights are they taking? They're taking their language, they're taking their land, no, they're not. Treat them as third and fourth class citizens. They shoot them indiscriminately. They murder them in Gaza. Even medical workers, the Israeli armed forces shot down and killed. So there's nothing good to be said about these people, other than they ought to go back where they came from, as Helen Thomas, the American journalist, said.
Jeffrey, Jeffrey, you read out part of the law, and obviously I believe there are 11 clauses, if I'm not mistaken, of this. But obviously, Jeffrey, the ones that are the most concerning are when the law says things like Jews have the exclusive right to national self-determination, and then it goes on to say that the state views the development of Jewish settlement as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment, essentially saying that Jewish-only segregated communities is A-OK with Israel.
Well, it doesn't say anything here about Jewish segregated communities. It says the state of Israel views Jewish settlement as a national value. Well, I don't think many people would argue with that in the context of the reason why the Jewish state was re-established. I'm going to tell you what I think the most contentious clause of these 11 clauses is, and that is Clause 1. The State of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And the idea of Jews being a nationality as well as a religion has, ever since the foundation of the modern Zionist movement, been a bone of contention within Jewish communities worldwide. Because if the State of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, then you call into question the loyalty of Jews to the states in which they happen to live outside Israel. This is a long-running dispute that goes back well before the Balfour Declaration. So I think Clause 1, subsection B, is going to be a bone of contention within Jewish communities. And I noted, I'm speaking from London, that the Board of Deputies of British Jews has come out rather lukewarmly against this basic law. But that's the only contentious clause I can see. The Arab language is fully protected. Religious observance and days of rest of other religions other than the Jewish religion are fully protected in this law.
Michael, what do you make of that?
Well, I think that the Haaretz article that I read today pretty much lays it out. It says that the Arabic language is no longer an official language of the Zionist entity. Arabic now has special status, whatever that might be. So it's basically more pressure against the Palestinians in the country and to denigrate them further. I mean, they're allowed to attend Jewish universities, are allowed to be taken into Jewish hospitals for treatment, but they're not allowed to have voting rights, they're not allowed to have citizenship rights, and it's a travesty to call Israel a democratic state. It is not. It is quite clearly an apartheid state. It is a state of oppression, and it makes South Africa look good. I mean, it's very much like the European concessions in China in the 19th century, where they had signs out in front of businesses and clubs saying no Chinamen or dogs allowed. And the Palestinians are seen as subhuman animals. I've had Palestinians tell me that they think that the Israeli mindset is that they've felt they've been persecuted so long that they feel they have to heal themselves by persecuting other people.
You know, Jeffrey, as you well know, Jeffrey, that there are even voices within Israel, Jeffrey, who are very much against this law. And I'll just quote one, if you allow me. Benny Begin, who is the son of the former Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, he said, and he's the founder, in fact, of Israel's Likud party, abstained from voting for this law, saying, and he warned about the party's growing disconnect from human rights. And, you know, as Michael mentioned earlier, also the president, Reuven Rivlin, clearly said, and I'm quoting him as well, that this would be used by the enemies of quote-unquote Israel and could be used as a weapon by people worldwide against the Jewish state, because it's expressly now talking about the fact that Arabs possibly are just second-class citizens. What do you make of that?
I don't see, with great respect to President Rivlin, I don't see in this law, which I have in front of me as I'm speaking to you, anything that discriminates against Arabs. I repeat, Clause 4 says this clause does not change the status given to the Arabic language before this law was created. You can't be clearer than that.
But Jeffrey, with due respect, Jeffrey, it's not just about the language, Jeffrey. It's also about, as I said, those communities which are exclusive to Jews. The fact that Jews will only have exclusive right to national self-determination. That does essentially then mean that any Arabs living within these occupied territories are automatically second-class citizens, aren't they?
Yeah, could you define what you mean by occupied territories?
I'm talking about what we would call Israel proper.
Arabs have full rights. Christians, Arab, Jews, they have voting rights, passport rights. There have been, at least one, to my knowledge, Druze member of the Supreme Court. Arabs are absolutely protected with
but
equal
Jeffrey,
rights
is it
in the
not true
state
that
of
Arabs
Israel.
cannot drive on some roads? Is it not true that Arabs cannot live in some
No,
communities?
sir, it
Is that
is
not
not
true?
true.
We've
It is
heard of
not
that
true.
over and over and over
It is
again, where there are
not
only
true.
Jewish exclusive roads and Jewish exclusive communities.
Sir, I have travelled extensively through Israel and the liberated territories on the West Bank. There is no such thing as an exclusively Jewish road.
Okay, Michael, what do you make of that? Are we just imagining all this, Michael?
I think the distinguished gentleman in Britain is imagining a lot of stuff, because that Palestinians who have traveled in occupied territories, all of what used to be Palestine is occupied by the oppressors, and they have told me repeatedly that there are roads only for Jews, there are roads only reserved for Palestinians, and these have checkpoints on them, so that if you're in an ambulance and you desperately need to get to a hospital for emergency medical treatment, you often die in the hospital while you're being held up at checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint. It's astonishing that he can say that. Even Donna Shalala, in the Clinton administration, of Arabic extraction and an American citizen, when she traveled to Israel, she was held up for hours at the airport. For example, I had another contact in the Voice of America, a high official there, who went to Israel on official business, and he was kept in the airport and gradually stripped of all his clothes down to being naked, and he decided the only way out of this was to run naked out into the reception hall, shouting that the Israeli government has taken his clothes and he wants them back. I spoke with a very active Muslim convert who was British, who had traveled to Israel, and they insisted on stripping her down to her underwear, and she said, well, I've had these same underpants on for days and they're pretty filthy. So they took them off her and had a woman holding a tissue in front of her private parts, and she looked down at the woman and said, are you enjoying this? So I think that there is a vast difference between what Mr. Altman says and what is reality in occupied Palestine.
You know, Jeffrey, it's interesting because we also talk about the attitude then behind this, because it can be argued that this law is symbolic, as Netanyahu himself essentially said that this is symbolic and this is just confirming, according to what Netanyahu said, is the status quo throughout the occupied territories. But Haaretz, Jeffrey, has quoted Avi Dichter, who is the sponsor of this law, and he turned to Arab MPs before voting, and he said, quote, and I'm quoting him, that we were here before you, and we will be here after you, end quote. That's the attitude that goes into this, isn't it, Jeffrey?
You know, we have to ask a question here. Why was this law ever dreamed up? Because arguing from my point of view that it's simply declaratory and simply, as it were, blesses the status quo, one might ask, it would be a legitimate question, why on earth did the Knesset spend time passing this law? I'm going to try and answer my own question. I think they did so for domestic political reasons within Israel. I think this law was for domestic consumption. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu heads a quite volatile coalition government. Some of the clauses in the original bill have been watered down, particularly Clause 7 on Jewish settlement. I think this is just a piece of propaganda, and one could ask the question, well, why did the Knesset waste time with this? That would be a legitimate question to ask. My answer would be for domestic political reasons. Incidentally, on the question of the subject matter that your other guest has just referred to, I flew recently from London, England to Belfast, and I was practically stripped naked down to my underpants. Unfortunately, this is a factor in modern life when you're jet-setting around the world.
So are you saying, Jeffrey, that the checkpoints that Michael mentioned, which are exclusive to Palestinians, let's admit it, that is okay, that it's okay to only check the Palestinians who are moving around the occupied territories, and that the Jews get to walk free. And we've seen, again, Jeffrey, many such images of Western journalists traveling around the occupied territories freely, those who are not Palestinian, not Arab, but then they have to, if they're with Palestinian minders or Palestinians in their entourage, those Palestinians must go through checkpoints. That is a double standard, is it not, Jeffrey?
You know, I travel quite frequently from Jerusalem to Efrat. I have to go through a checkpoint. I have to show my passport, and on one occasion I was asked to get out of the car to be body searched. I don't mind that at all. It's a fact of life.
Okay, so Michael, it's a fact of life, but then, you know, at the same time, Michael, the Arabs, the Palestinians, I should say, in fact, in the occupied territories are obviously furious. They've called this a racist law, saying that the state is essentially declaring that it does not want us here. That's according to one Israeli Arab MP. Others have said that this is racist legislation by a radical right-wing government that is creating radical laws and is planting the seeds to create an apartheid state. What do you make of this, Michael, from the Palestinians' point of view?
Well, the Palestinians quite rightly are furious. They see that they're being pushed further and further into a corner. They have seen what little rights they had to begin with disappear, and yet there are 6.5 million of them in all of occupied Palestine versus 8.3 million Jews in the same area. And the idea is to push them out and to starve them, and to, especially in Gaza, where they have almost no food, no water, no electricity, and no clean water, no sewage treatment plants. You know, this is inhuman. This is worse than what the American government did to the Indians in the 19th century. It is what the Nazis did to the Jews in the 20th century. And I think that what we've got is a repetition of the past without actually looking at it. And I think that the American government is encouraging this by moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Al-Quds, and at the same time wanting to give Israel, the Zionist entity, $38 billion over the next 10 years. I think this only encourages people like Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, and he announced that this law was one of his top priorities. And when it was passed, he came out and said that this is a great mark in the annals of Zionism. So we see this for what it is. It's naked aggression, naked hostility towards the subject people, in violation of international law, in violation of human rights, and in violation of basic sanity.
Jeffrey, I wanted to get your opinion, and just for a moment, if you put yourself in the shoes of Palestinians, about how you would feel about this, because even Adala, the legal center for Arab minority rights in Israel, has called this law an attempt to, quote, advance ethnic superiority by promoting racist policies. What do you make of that, Jeffrey?
You know, if I was an Arab gay person, homosexual, transgender or lesbian, I would be damn glad that I lived in Israel and not in Gaza or Iran.
So are you saying that with the exclusion of those groups that you've mentioned, that everybody else should not be happy to be in Israel?
I'm telling you that from the point of view of basic human rights and dignity, no Arab state, unfortunately, has the underpinning of basic human rights that Israel has. Otherwise, how do you explain that there are in Israel lesbian and gay refugees from other Arab countries?
But to be fair, Jeffrey, with the destruction of Khan al-Ahmar, we saw Israeli soldiers ripping off, literally, female Palestinians' hijabs, veils off their heads. So you talk about a state which respects religious freedoms. What kind of a soldier gets away with ripping off somebody's hijab? Would any country around the world allow your Jewish skullcap to be ripped off your head without consequence?
You know, when I was in the Lebanon, in Beirut some years ago, I was told quite firmly not to wear my skullcap as I walked around the streets of Beirut, because my host said they could not be responsible for my safety if I did so. Are you going to defend that?
Michael, you know, I'm standing in Iran, and I've seen a lot of Jews walking around this country with their skull caps on quite proudly. What do you make of that, Michael?
Well, Lebanon is, as I understand it, is a very free and very open society. It was once seen as the Switzerland of the Middle East. Beirut was seen as the Paris of the East. I frankly don't believe this. The Lebanese that I know, that I've met personally and I've worked with, were very accommodating, very accepting of various religions and political attitudes and genders. So I frankly am taken aback at this.
All right, we'll have to leave that as our final word, gentlemen, but of course we do appreciate both your contributions to tonight's discussion. That was Michael Springman, author and former U.S. diplomat, speaking to us live from Washington, D.C. And we were also joined by Mr. Jeffrey Alderman, who is joining us live from London, and he is an author and political commentator. And of course, viewers, we appreciate you joining us as well. Until next time, good night.